Been a long friend of Boom now, very instrumental in helping us raise our last round, and happy to have him introduce me. Also, I'd like to give a nod to Joris, who has built an amazing company and an amazing product, which, as he mentioned, we're heavy users of. So I'll talk a little more about that. Whoa, sorry. So I want to start off today by kind of zooming out a bit and talking about why travel matters. Why do we choose to travel at all? And for many of us, travel is about accessing the amazing experiences the planet has to offer. So live music, culture, history, nature. And in our business lives, of course, we all work with remote colleagues all the time. And, we have video conferencing, Slack, email. But the important deals are done in person. And the most successful work is still done face-to-face. And there's a reason why we all gather in one room here instead of holding this conference virtually. And of course, this is a familiar scene to everybody. Today we have video conferencing. We can jump on a call with family and friends, whether across the country or on a remote continent. But we live in an age where there's frequent, reliable, and safe access to just about every corner of the planet. And if you look at global passenger volumes since 1970, there's been healthy growth for the past 5 decades, with almost 3.5 billion passengers in 2015. So modern communication hasn't reduced our demand for travel. It's quite the opposite. The more you have the ability to access the experiences of the globe, the more likely you are to want to experience them in person. Modern communication gives us a taste of what the world has to offer, but it only makes our appetite stronger for the real thing. So if we look at what airlines offer today, they have these amazing onboard experiences, but they're not really the goal of travel. These experiences they just help us reduce the pain of traveling long distances. And if you step back and sort of look at throughout human history, there's been steady progress in our capability of accessing the planet. And at each stage in technology development, horizons expanded and new possibilities for business, exploration, adventure have grown. Not expanding here. So one thing we ask at Boom is, what's the next step here? What's the next step in human capability for accessing the planet? What's the next step in travel? And one answer to that was Concorde. Now, many of you are probably familiar with this airplane. It's a beautiful airplane, brilliant feat of engineering. Designed in the 1960s, first flight in 1969, retired in 2003. Mach 2.2 cruising speed, it was capable of taking 100 passengers across the Atlantic in 3.5 hours. But only 14 flew commercially. So what happened here? It's worth taking a step back in history and trying to understand the story of this airplane and the story of speed in general. And one way to do that is to look at Hawaii as an interesting case study in aviation history. If you wanted to go from San Francisco to Hawaii in the 30s and 40s, you'd take one of these flying boats. And it took 18 hours. So only a few thousand people ever made that trip. And the jet age changed all that. The Boeing 707 Clipper was one of the first commercially successful jet airliners, introduced in 1957. And suddenly, places like Hawaii became tourist attractions. And travel to the islands increased 6x over the next decade. And in the 1960s, Concorde was imagined as the natural next step in aviation. Just as the jet airplane replaced the propeller airplane, Concorde was going to bring supersonic travel to the masses. The problem is, it wasn't a very fuel-efficient airplane. It was an airplane several decades ahead of its time. Joris talked about market timing. This is maybe the biggest case of all. In the years since, there have been many advances in aerospace engineering, design, and manufacturing that the Concorde designers weren't able to take advantage of. And more on this in a bit. Here's what the cabin of Concorde looked like. It wasn't very spacious. 100 seats that were pretty small and uncomfortable. And the window was about the size of your iPhone. And one of these seats from New York to London would cost about $20,000 round trip. And that price, many of them flew empty. So then what can we do today? Building on the lessons from Concorde, how can we break through and restart the aviation innovation engine? This is the Boom Supersonic Airliner. It's designed to carry 55 passengers at Mach 2.2. That's 1,451 miles per hour. It's 2.6 times faster than today's subsonic airplanes. I'd love to talk a little bit about the engineering that goes into this and why it's possible to do it today and how it differs from Concorde. So there are three main areas of innovation that make this airplane possible today: aerodynamics, materials, and propulsion. I'll briefly touch on each one. So Concorde's designers worked in wind tunnels. They built models like this, which took months to build and design and test. So they only got a few dozen iterations in on the aerodynamics of the airplane. And we have the benefit of 50 years of aerodynamics research, and more importantly, computing and software. We can use companies like Rescale to run simulations, and instead of 6 months between iterations of our designs, we can do hundreds of designs per day. So being able to iterate on the aerodynamics is one of the major enabling technologies that the Concorde designers just didn't have access to. Carbon fiber composites are another key technology that's only recently become widely available for an airline application. Carbon allows us to build the streamlined flowing shapes that the aerodynamicists require, while also handling the extreme temperatures of supersonic flight much better than aluminum. And lastly, we need to look at engine technologies. Concorde was the only airliner ever to fly with an afterburner. We had a Concorde engineer tell us that when they turned on the afterburner, there was a 78% increase in fuel burn for only a 17% increase in thrust, which is a terrible trade. 50 years later, we now have the modern turbofan, which you see on all major airliners today. So our engine will be a similar turbofan to the 787, with a medium-sized fan that's a nice compromise between airport noise and supersonic drag. So with these developments, it's possible to create an airplane that's 30% more fuel efficient than Concorde. And when you combine the efficiency of our airplane with the fact that it's sized for today's over-water routes, you can create a product that you can fly profitably on over 500 routes worldwide. We're discussing two different configurations with airlines today: a 55-seat all-business class configuration and a 45-seat two-class cabin. And you might ask, why do airlines actually care about this? From a fundamental business standpoint, why is this a product they're actually interested in, other than it's an interesting breakthrough in technology? And the real answer here is all about differentiation. Airlines today basically fly the same routes with the same airplanes and pretty much the same onboard product. But we can offer them something truly different. Supersonic is a true differentiator, and it allows airlines to compete in an axis that they haven't been able to since the dawn of the jet age, which is speed. So we've been very public for a while now about our relationship with Virgin. The Virgin Group has an option on the first 10 airplanes, and they're contributing to flight test and manufacturing support for our demonstrator aircraft, which I'll talk about in a minute. But we also announced at the Paris Air Show this year, that we have pre-orders totaling 76 aircraft. And while I can't talk in more detail about exactly which airlines we're working with, I can tell you that these are major airlines with large fleets, and they're investing millions of dollars today in Boom in order to get access to this airplane. These are not just simple LOIs with no real commitment attached. Now, of course, we are a startup, as Paul pointed out, and designing a supersonic airliner 50 years after Concorde, that's no small feat. We're aware of this. We're fans of speed at Boom, but building a full-scale airliner is perhaps not the first airplane to start with. So today we have a world-class team, a small team, but really amazing engineers from the best aerospace companies in the world working on a technology demonstrator. This is the Xbone Demonstrator. It's roughly a third the length of the full airliner. It's flown by 2 experimental test pilots, designed to go Mach 2.2. And it's designed to test many of the same systems and design features that will go into the full-scale airplane. Obviously, it doesn't look exactly like if you scaled the whole airplane down, but that's because people don't scale the same way that the rest of the airplane does. And this isn't just a concept. We completed preliminary design review last June, and we're beginning detailed design and manufacturing at our facility in Denver, Colorado right now. This airplane is fully funded through first flight. I think we're the only supersonic program that can actually say that. There's a bunch of other programs out there that are going on, but we have the money in place to put this in the air. And we completed a second wind tunnel test this summer, and here's a beautiful photo from that test. It shows what's called vortex flow coming off the wing. This could be straight out of a textbook on delta wing design. So here's the two airplanes side by side. We're aiming to fly the Demonstrator sometime around the end of next year, and we hope to bring the Airliner to the market sometime in the mid-2020s. So stepping back, to really understand what this airplane's capable of, I have a few example itineraries I'd love to talk about. The first one really drives home the kinds of trips that become possible when you can go twice as fast, or 2.6 times as fast. If you take the first flight out of New York, you can be in downtown London by early afternoon, have some meetings, take a client to dinner, and take the last flight back to New York, and be home in time to tuck your kids into bed on the day you left. It's a completely different trip. San Francisco to Tokyo in just 5.5 hours. This cuts entire days off a trip to Japan. Instead of sleeping on the airplane, you can sleep in a comfortable hotel bed, or better yet, in your own bed with less time away from your family. And lastly, LA to Sydney is fascinating. Sydney today is about as far away as Hawaii was at the dawn of the jet age. So as a result, many people don't make this trip. They can't afford the time and the money. Imagine the change in tourism, business relationships, if you could get there in just under 7 hours. So we have an incredible team in Denver working on making this a reality. We made a short video about why this mission matters to us and why we think it's important to the world, and I'd love to play it for you now.
The pursuit of speed is often relegated to the adrenaline seekers, the risk takers, the record breakers. But our pursuit of speed is about something greater. It's speed in service of the experiences that make life precious. Imagine, if you will, flying across the Atlantic, doing business, and being home in time to tuck your children into bed, or where New Zealand becomes as accessible as New York. What would that do for families, for culture, for business? The technology for supersonic flight has existed for over 50 years.
Is the new supersonic airplane.
But it was too expensive for routine travel. At Boom, we are refining it, perfecting it, so that high-speed travel can be available to anyone. In the digital age, there really is no more distance. There is only time. Time from one another. Our mission is to remove that barrier, meaning more meetings in a day and more nights with loved ones. Where children grow up with their parents at home, and where relationships are no longer considered long distance. We see New York to London in 3 hours instead of 7. San Francisco to Tokyo in 5 hours instead of 11. We see world leaders spending more time in the same room, the acceptance of cultures, and the spreading of ideas. At Boom, we see the time saved as really the least important part. This isn't about time saved, it's about life gained. Together, we can make cities into neighborhoods and make the world a smaller place. Boom. The future is supersonic.
So thank you for your time. Come find me anytime if you want to talk more about what we're up to. And I wanted to thank the organizers here for inviting us to share our vision with you. Thank you very much.